Supposedly, though, you could see signs of what we would call today forms of graffiti and whatnot, pleading for the return of the properties that were now in the hands of the big landowners. And to make the injustice of this whole loss of the yeoman farm somewhat worse was the fact that one of the reasons so many of these farms were falling into default, making them easy prey to be bought up by wealthier people, was the fact that the farmers themselves were off for years fighting. Had they been home on their farms like they thought they should have been, those farms never might have been in default. Then those soldiers would return home after serving their time for the state, only to find their farms gone, their families indigent, and there was obviously, you can sort of read between the lines in the sources, a simmering discontent amongst these folks. Tiberius Gracchus was drawn to those people. And one of his greatest speeches is directed directly at those veterans who returned home to find that they had somehow been cheated by the system. He says to them in his speech, quote, "The beasts of the field and the birds of the air have their holes and their hiding places. But the men who fight and die for Italy enjoy only the light and the air. Our generals urge their soldiers to fight for the graves and shrines of their ancestors. The appeal is idle and false. You cannot point to a paternal altar. You have no ancestral tomb. You fight and die to give wealth and luxury to others. You're called the masters of the world, but there's not a foot of ground that you can call your own." End quote. That is good old-fashioned fire and brimstone populism, and he was scaring the Roman elites like nothing before. Tiberius became tribune of the plebs in 133 BC. This was an interesting position for a blue blood to grab, and he seemed intent upon championing the cause of the people. Was it because it was a surefire way to power, as some in Rome's senatorial class thought, or was he an idealistic reformer, championing the philosophies he learned as a kid from his Greek tutors? Whatever it was, it filled him with a certain courage that Leolus didn't have when he backed down from the Senate's opposition. Tiberius proposed the same sorts of agrarian reforms that Leolus and other people we would call today liberal reformers were pushing. And liberal reformers in the Senate, some of these old-line senators, joined in Tiberius's cause. They'd seen the manpower shortage. They knew things had to change, and the agrarian law that Tiberius was pushing would change them. The law called for all these lands to be broken up and redistributed to the common folks. And they go back to a law that was a couple of centuries old and that had never been enforced. The new agrarian laws demanded that they be enforced. But this created all kinds of problems. For hundreds of years, the law had been ignored. The properties had grown larger. Multiple improvements had been made on all of them. Sometimes these properties that were technically illegal had been sold and resold again, even though the law said that the state would compensate the landowners and pay for the improvements. The Senate howled in outrage. Tiberius Gracchus was an intelligent man. He knew what Leolus had run into when Leolus wanted the Senate to pass these laws. So Tiberius Gracchus didn't go to the Senate. He knew there was a stalemate waiting for him there, and that the Roman governmental system would thwart him. He also knew, though, as tribune of the